The wind that night carried dust and judgment. It howled through the open doorway of the Dobbs farmhouse, rattling the lantern flame until it sputtered like a dying soul. And in that trembling light, Clara may stood barefoot on the splintered floorboards. Two swaddled infants clutched to her chest. Her husband's voice cut through the storm like a whip. "Two girls," he said, his tone a curse. "That's what you give me after all this waiting? Two mouths to feed, and not a name worth passing on." He was a big man, Eli Dobbs, all muscle and meanness, a face the prairie wind had carved hard as stone. His hand shook with drink, but his eyes burned steady with something worse than anger, disappointment. "I can work," Clara whispered. "Please, Eli, they're yours too." He spat in the dirt between them. "No, they're yours. Take Em and go. I don't feed useless mouths." The twins stirred in her arms. One whimpered. The other coughed, a tiny, frail sound against the roar of the wind. Clara flinched as Eli took a step forward, his shadow stretching long across the plank floor. Don't make me say it again. For a long, breaking second, the world held still. Then the storm found its voice again. Thunder rolled across the plains, and Clara May walked out into it, barefoot, shivering, her nightdress clinging wet against her skin. Behind her, the door slammed. She heard the bolt slide home. He didn't just close the door. He closed the life. By dawn, the trail behind her was gone, wiped clean by wind and snow. The Wyoming frontier stretched empty in all directions, a land of bones and silence. Clara trudged on, each step heavier than the last. The twins, only 2 days old, slept in their wrappings, their breasts shallow and warm against her heart. Her arms ached. Her lips were cracked. She hadn't eaten since the night she gave birth. The road was nothing but ruts and frozen mud. Her boots, too thin for snow, had torn open. Every step sliced her feet raw. Still, she walked, because stopping meant death. By midday, her shawl was stiff with frost. She saw no houses, no smoke, no sign of life except the circling shapes of crows high above. The world was white and gray and endless. She stopped by a broken fence post, leaned against it to catch her breath. The silence pressed close, broken only by the weak cries of her daughters. "Shoo," she murmured, though her voice trembled. "Mama's here. Mama's right here." She wasn't sure she was speaking to them, or herself. By the second night, the snow turned to rain. Her legs gave out beside a half-rotted wagon, half buried in mud. She crawled beneath it, clutching her babies to her chest. The cold bit deep, teeth of ice gnawing through her bones. She could hear the wolves somewhere out there in the dark, low, steady howls, echoing across the flats. Once, she'd prayed for a husband who would love her gentle. Now, she prayed for daylight, for warmth, for anything but this ache in her chest. The twins cried softly, then weaker still. She pulled them closer, whispering names through chattering teeth. "Your hope," she said to first, "and your grace." The words came out like a promise, cracked but holy. The storm worsened. Wind clawed through the wagon's gaps. Water pooled beneath her knees. Her vision blurred. Somewhere between waking and sleep, she saw her mother's face, soft, smiling, long gone. She reached out and whispered, "Mama, I'm tired." Then came the sound. Low, slow, heavy, hoofbeats. Her eyes flew open. Shapes moved in the rain. 3, no, for wolves, shadows circling. Eyes glowing faint amber in the dark. She fumbled for a stick, but her hands were numb. She pressed her babies under the wagon, covering them with her own body. "Go on," she screamed hoarsely. "Go. Leave us." The wolves crouched low, growling. One step closer. Then, a single rifle shot cracked through the storm. The sound echoed like thunder on wood. The lead wolf yelped and vanished into the brush. The others scattered. Through the mist, a horse's breath steamed white. The rider was tall, wrapped in a long oilskin coat, a wide hat shadowing his face. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking in the mud. Clara blinked, half dreaming. Who are you?" He didn't answer, only knelt beside her, steady and calm, and lifted one of the twins with surprising gentleness. checked her breathing. Then the other, his gloved hand, came to rest on Clara's shoulder. "You can't stay here," he said finally, his voice low and rough, like gravel stirred by rain. She stared up at him. "Please don't send me back." He looked at her a long moment, rain running down his face. Then he extended his hand. "Come on," he said simply. They rode through the dark in silence. She clung to him, weak, holding her babies tight as the horse plowed through the storm. The man said nothing. Only once did he glance back, as if to make sure she hadn't fallen asleep for good. By dawn, they reached a small ranch nestled between hills, a weathered cabin, a half-collapsed barn, and a corral that held more ghosts than horses. The man dismounted, lifted her gently down, and opened the cabin door. The warmth hit her like a mercy she didn't deserve. Inside, the place was simple. A hearth of stone, a single bed, a rough-hewn table. She sank near the fire while he stoked it back to life. Only then did she see his face clearly, a man in his 30s, dark-haired, unshaven, a scar running from jaw to temple. His eyes, pale gray, held the kind of silence born from loss. He poured her a tin cup of water. "Drink slow." "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once. She tried to read him, but his expression gave nothing. No pity, no judgment. Just the quiet focus of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. As the hours passed, the fire thawed her bones. The baby slept wrapped in a wool blanket he'd found. She wanted to ask his name, but something in his stillness made her wait. He tended to chores outside, wordless, methodical. She watched from the window as he chopped wood, fed the horse, and fixed the hinge on the gate. He moved like someone who didn't rush because he had nowhere to be, like someone who'd made peace with being alone. When he came back inside, she finally asked, "Why'd you help me?" He shrugged. "Couldn't ride past." That was all. But in that simple answer, she heard a kind of decency she hadn't known in years. Night came. The storm had passed, leaving the land hushed and white under the moon. He built another fire and handed her a bowl of stew, thin but hot. She ate slowly, everybody to remind her of how close she'd come to dying. The twins stirred. He looked at them a long while before saying, "Names?" She smiled faintly, hope and grace. He nodded, gaze flicking to the fire. "Good ones." "You have family?" she asked softly.
He hesitated. Had. Nothing more. The way he said it made her heart ache for him. She didn't ask again. Later, as she lay beside the fire with her daughters curled against her, she heard him outside, hammering something into wood, maybe fixing a stall door. Each strike echoed steady and sure, like a promise. For the first time in weeks, she closed her eyes without fear of what might wake her. When morning came, light spilled across the cabin floor in golden bands. The babies cooed softly. She stirred awake to the smell of coffee and the sound of a horse neighing outside. He stood by the stove, pouring coffee into a tin mug. He glanced her way. "There's bread and beans." She sat up, half embarrassed. "You didn't have to. Didn't say I did." His mouth twitched, maybe the ghost of a smile. She smiled back, tired but grateful. "You got a name, mister?" He looked out the window for a long moment before answering. "Luke Carver." The name fit him, plain, strong, like the land itself. She touched the twins' hair, soft as corn silk. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Carver." "Don't need thanks," he said, putting on his hat. "Just stay alive." Then he stepped out into the morning light, shoulders squared against the wind. She spent the next hours watching him from the doorway, how he moved through the land like it knew him, how he never wasted a word or emotion. When he returned that evening, she tidied the place, washed the tin dishes, swept the hearth. He said nothing, but she saw the faintest surprise in his eyes. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt safe. That night, after he'd gone to tend the horses, Clara sat by the fire with the twins asleep in her lap. The crackle of flames filled the quiet. Her thoughts drifted to Eli, to the cold look in his eyes, to the words that had sent her into the storm. And yet, in this lonely cabin, with two tiny hearts beating beside hers, She felt something she hadn't felt since before all that pain began. Hope. She whispered it aloud, testing the word like a prayer. Hope. Outside, the wind moaned low across the hills. And under that vast, merciless sky, a woman who'd been cast out found shelter, not just from the storm, but from the world itself. The thaw came late that spring. Snow melted slow off the hills, turning the dirt road to rivers of brown and the air to mud and memory. The world around Luke Carver's ranch was waking up, hawks circling the sky, streams running clear again, patches of green pushing through frost. And in the middle of it all, Clara May Dobbs began to live again. She worked beside the cabin from dawn till dusk, washing, tending, stitching, nursing. When she wasn't caring for the twins, she was mending the old roof or scraping rust off a forgotten kettle. The days hurt her body but soothed her mind. Luke never said much. He'd leave at sunrise, returning at dusk with wood piled high on the wagon or a deer slung over the saddle. He'd nod when he saw her, sometimes offer a few words about the weather, the well, or the fences that needed fixing. That was all. But to Clara, even silence had become a kind of safety. One morning, she stepped outside and found him by the barn, kneeling beside a broken wagon wheel. "Need a hand?" she asked. He looked up, squinting against the sun. "You any good with a hammer?" She smiled faintly. "Better than I was a month ago." He handed her the tool, without a word. Together they worked, the quiet broken only by the rhythmic thud of wood and the whicker of horses. She could feel the warmth of him nearby, the steady calm in his movements, the patience that came from long years of doing everything alone. When the wheel was fixed, he straightened up and wiped his hands. "Good work." Clara almost laughed. It had been so long since anyone had said that to her. "Thank you." He nodded once, as if he didn't quite know what to do with gratitude. The days fell into rhythm. Each morning, she'd hear the slow creak of the corral gate, the whinny of Luke's horse, the rustle of feed. The twins, Hope and Grace, had begun to smile, their giggles lighting the dim cabin like sun through dust. Sometimes Luke would pause at the door to watch them play. His face softened then, the faintest crack in the mask of solitude he wore. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of pine and rain, Clara found him outside by the fence, staring toward the horizon. "You don't talk much," she said gently. He shrugged. "Nothing worth saying most days." "Maybe. But sometimes talking helps." He gave a half-smile. "And sometimes it just stirs up ghosts." She wanted to ask what kind of ghosts haunted him, but the look in his eyes stopped her. So she stood there beside him instead, letting the silence stretch until it became a kind of shared peace. That night, a storm rolled through, lightning flashing over the plains, thunder shaking the windows. The twins wailed in fright. Luke came in from the barn, soaked to the bone. "You all right?" "They're scared," she said, trying to calm them. He crouched near the fire, tossed on more wood, and the light chased the shadows back. The smell of smoke filled the cabin. When the thunder cracked again, one of the babies clutched at his finger. He froze, as if afraid to move. Clara watched the scene with a trembling heart. "She likes you," she said softly. Luke looked down at the tiny hand wrapped around his. His voice was barely a whisper. "Haven't held a child since." He trailed off. His face turned away, jaw tight. Clara said nothing, just reached over and placed a gentle hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. The fire popped. Rain drummed steady on the roof. "She was 2, he said finally. "My little girl, Anna." The words came like stones, heavy and slow. Raiders came. Burned the homestead. I was off riding patrol for the army. By the time I came back, there was nothing but ash. Clara's breath caught. "Your wife." She didn't make it. Silence followed. Deep, aching silence. The twins' small breathing filled the space between them. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. He nodded once, eyes fixed on the flames. "Ain't your burden." "No," she said quietly, "but it's yours. And nobody should carry one like that alone." Something shifted in the room then, something small but unbreakable. It wasn't love, not yet. but it was understanding. And in a world this cruel, that was rarer still. The next days came softer. Luke spoke a little more. Laughed once when Grace tugged his beard. Clara found herself humming when she worked, a tune she'd forgotten years ago. Still, she couldn't shake the fear that this peace was borrowed time, that the world had a way of finding those who tried to hide from it. That fear proved true. It began with hoofbeats on the distant road. Faint at first, then clearer. Clara was hanging laundry outside when she heard them. She froze, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. A pair of riders. Dust rising behind them. Not travelers. Not neighbors. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. By the time Luke came out of the barn, the men were already close enough to see their faces, mean-looking, scarred, with the kind of eyes that never smiled. One spat a wad of tobacco, grinning. "Howdy, Carver." "Fine morning." Luke's stance shifted, loose but ready. "Depends who's asking." "Name's Jeb Harlow. This here's my brother, Tom. We're riding on business from Eli Dobbs." Clara's breath hitched. Her hands went cold. Jeb's grin widened. "Seems a woman and a pair of brats ran off from him. He reckons you been keepin' what's his." Luke didn't move. "Ain't got nothin' of his." "Funny," Jeb said, turning in the saddle to glance at Clara. "'Cause that sure looks like her." The world seemed to tilt. Clara's knees almost buckled. Luke stepped between her and the riders, his voice quiet but edged in steel. "You best turn around." Jeb chuckled. "Now hold on, friend. No need for trouble. Eli just wants his woman back. And if you hand her over, maybe he'll be generous enough to forget about that bounty he's talkin'." The wind carried the sound of the horses' restless snorts. No one moved. Luke's hand rested near his holster, not on it, just close enough that both men saw. Jeb's grin faltered. Tom shifted in his saddle. "Let's go," he muttered. "Ain't worth it." "Fine," Jeb sneered. "But this ain't done. Dobbs'll come hisself next time." He spat in the dirt and turned his horse. The riders galloped off, kicking up dust that hung in the air long after they were gone. Clara sank to her knees, clutching her shawl. "He won't stop, Luke. He'll come back." Luke holstered his gun and stared down the road until the riders disappeared. Then he said simply, "Let him." That night, neither of them slept. Clara sat by the window, rocking the twins. Luke cleaned his rifle in silence, the firelight glinting off metal. Finally, she spoke. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for me." He didn't look up. "Wasn't a risk. Eli's dangerous. So's the land. We're still here." She set the babies down and faced him.
"Why?
"Why are you doing this?
You don't even know me."
Luke looked up then, eyes steady on hers. "I know what it's like to lose everything." He paused. "And I know what it's like when somebody gives you a reason not to." Her throat tightened. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Outside, the wind carried the sound of coyotes far off in the hills. When she finally whispered, her voice was thick with tears. "Thank you." He nodded, gaze softening. "Ain't nobody undeserving of a second chance." The days that followed carried an uneasy calm. They fortified the cabin, stacked wood, and filled water barrels. Luke taught her how to load a rifle, though her hands trembled on the trigger. "Don't aim at what you're scared of," he said gently. "Aim at what you're protecting." It became their rhythm, preparing, waiting, hoping. But beneath it all, Clara felt something new stirring inside her. When he'd pass her a cup of coffee, his fingers brushing hers, something small but warm would flicker through her chest. When she saw him cradle hope to sleep, she'd feel her heart twist, soft and unfamiliar. It frightened her almost as much as it comforted her, because she'd loved once before, and look where that had led. One evening, she found Luke sitting alone outside, the sun bleeding red behind the ridges. She joined him, the air cool and still. "Beautiful tonight," she said. He nodded. "Don't get many nights this quiet." She looked at him then, the scars, the tired eyes, the way the light caught the edges of his face. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He shook his head. "This land's all I got. Buried too much of my life here to start over." She looked down. I thought I'd buried mine too. He turned to her. Maybe not. Maybe you just started again. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Unspoken, fragile, real. But far down the valley, unseen in the fading light, a lone rider sat watching through a spyglass. He lowered it, spat, and turned his horse east, toward Eli Dobbs. That night, Clara dreamed of smoke and fire, of a door slamming, of the words, "You gave me two mouths I didn't ask for." She woke with a start, the twins crying beside her, heart hammering in her chest. Luke was already awake, standing by the window, watching the road. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, in that low gravel voice that carried both strength and sorrow, he said, "Storm's coming." And this time, he didn't mean the weather. The dawn came cruelly quiet. Only the faint whistle of wind moved through the tall grass that bent toward the distant buttes. The sun hadn't yet burned through the gray mist, and the cabin, Luke's cabin, stood like a scar on the plain. Inside, Clara stirred. The babies whimpered in their cradle box. Luke was already gone from the bed, his boots and rifle missing. Something in her chest turned cold. She rose fast, pulling on her shawl and stepping out into the raw morning. The horses were restless, heads jerking toward the ridge. And then she saw him, Luke, standing by the fence line, still as stone, his eyes locked on the horizon. "Luke," she called softly. He didn't answer. He was watching three riders cutting across the flats, moving hard, fast. Her heart seized. She knew that posture, that way of riding. Eli had found them. The past was coming on horseback. Luke's jaw tightened as he spoke, low and steady. "You take the twins inside. Bar the door. Don't come out till I call for you." "Luke, no." I said inside. His voice wasn't angry. It was the sound of a man who'd made peace with the storm about to break. Clara gathered the babies, hands trembling. Her mind was chaos. Eli couldn't have known. He couldn't, but she knew he'd never let her live free. Not after what she'd done. Shamed him by surviving, by birthing daughters instead of the son he thought God owed him. She pressed her face against the window slats and watched Luke step forward, rifle in hand, as the three men came down the ridge. Eli rode in front, his duster snapping behind him like a banner of vengeance. "Never thought I'd find you hiding behind another man's land," Eli called out, reining in. He dismounted, spurs biting into the frozen earth. His eyes were small, mean. "You got something of mine, woman." Luke stood between them, the rifle loose but ready in his hands. "She don't belong to you." Eli's lip curled. "You don't even know what you're defending. That woman's a curse. Took my name, my home, near ruined my soul." Luke's voice dropped low. "I know what she is. And she's worth dying for." The air held its breath. Then the gunfire split it apart. Luke fired first, clean, fast. One of Eli's men dropped from the saddle, face first into the dust. The other drew and fired wildly. Luke's shoulder snapped back with the hit, but he didn't fall. He pivoted, fired again, and the second man spun out of the saddle. Now it was only Eli. The world shrank to two men, and the smoke curling between them. "You think she loves you?" Eli snarled. "She'll leave you same as she left me." Luke didn't answer. His breath was ragged, blood soaking his sleeve. He lifted the rifle, steady but slower now. Eli lunged first. The two crashed together in the dirt, fists and fury flying. The rifle went spinning. Eli's hand found the knife at his belt and drove it down, missing Luke's throat by inches. Luke rolled, grunting, and slammed his fist into Eli's jaw once, twice again, until the man's teeth flashed red. "Stop." Clara's scream split the wind. She was on the porch now, barefoot, her hair loose like flame. She clutched a pistol Luke had given her weeks ago. Eli turned toward her, teeth bared. "You gonna shoot me, girl? You couldn't even look me in the eye last time." Something inside her broke, and rebuilt all at once. Her voice was steady. "You're right. I couldn't." She raised the gun. "But I ain't that woman anymore." The The shot echoed across the plain. Eli staggered back, eyes wide, clutching his chest. He fell to his knees, breath rattling like paper in the wind. He looked at her one last time, not with rage, but disbelief. Then he was still. The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Clara dropped the gun and ran to Luke. He was on one knee, his face pale, blood seeping through his shirt. "No, no, stay with me," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound. He winced, but a small smile crept through the pain. "Reckon you don't need Savon anymore." "Don't you dare say that." Tears streaked her cheeks. "You brought me back to life, Luke. You can't leave me now." He chuckled weakly. "That's the trouble with life, Clara. It keeps going, even when it hurts." She tore strips from her dress, binding his shoulder tight. "You're not dying, not here, not like this." Clara, his hand found hers, warm and trembling. "You did it. You faced him." She pressed her forehead against his. "We faced him." Outside, the wind howled over the plains, scattering the smoke, carrying away the echoes of the fight. The twins cried from inside the cabin, a fragile sound that somehow cut through the chaos, life reminding them both what still mattered. Luke's breath steadied. "We'll make it," he murmured. "I promise you that." By sundown, the bodies were buried near the ridge, under a lone cottonwood. Clara marked the graves with stones but spoke no prayers. The land itself seemed to take them, unflinching and final. Luke sat by the fire, pale but alive. His arm was bound, and his face looked older now, carved by both pain and peace. Clara came to him, the babies asleep against her chest. "You should rest." He looked up, eyes soft. "Reckon I should thank you." "For what?" "For finishin' what I couldn't." He smiled faintly. "You got a fire in you, Clara. World tried to bury it, but it's still burnin'." She knelt beside him, tears glimmering in the firelight. "I was so afraid for so long. Afraid of God. Afraid of men. Afraid of livin'. You showed me how to stand." He reached out, touching her cheek. "You did that yourself." The days turned quiet again. The danger was gone, but something deeper remained, a peace that came only after surviving hell. Clara rebuilt what had been broken. She mended fences, cooked, cleaned, sang to her daughters under the wide Wyoming sky. Each day, Luke healed a little more. Some nights, when the firelight danced on the walls, he'd play his harmonica, soft, low tunes that carried her heart somewhere between sorrow and hope. Once, she asked him what he thought heaven looked like. He smiled. "Maybe it's just this, land, sky, and someone worth holding close." She leaned against his shoulder. "Then I'm already there." Spring came in color. The grass turned green, the streams thawed, and life found its way back into the soil. The twins, Lydia and Hope, were learning to walk. Luke built a small corral for the colts, and Clara planted wildflowers around the porch. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the sky, she stood outside watching the horizon. Her life had once ended under that same sky. Now it had begun again. Luke came up behind her, arm in a sling but eyes bright. "They'll grow up strong," he said, nodding toward the girls playing in the dirt. "Stronger than me," she said softly. He smiled. "Ain't possible." She turned to him, taking his hand. "You still think the land can forgive us after all we done?" He looked out at the mountains. "The land don't hold grudges, Clara. It just asks you to keep going." She nodded, tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were something lighter, like the first rain after drought. As the stars rose, she sat on the porch, babies asleep inside, Luke by her side. The night was vast, endless, and for the first time in years, she felt small in the right way, not helpless, but part of something larger. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "He cast me out, Luke. Said I was no wife, no mother. But look at me now." Luke's hand brushed hers. He was blind. "You're more woman than any man deserved." She smiled, voice trembling. "And you were the hand that saved me." He shook his head. "No, Clara. You were the one who reached back. The wind shifted then, gentle and warm. Somewhere out there, the coyotes howled, and the plains answered with silence. Narrator's voice, reflective closing. They say the frontier was a place for men, steel-eyed, hard-handed, unyielding. But I reckon it was women like Clara who held it together. Women who lost everything and still found the strength to love again. Maybe that's what redemption really is. Not forgiveness from God or men, but the moment you decide to stand up in the dust and keep walking.
Clara did.
Under God's wide sky, with her daughters in her arms and a quiet man beside her, she found a kind of freedom no preacher could name. And if you ask me, that's the truest miracle of all.